The orchard stretched across the low hillside in ordered rows, its geometry visible even from the dirt road that curved past its boundary fence. Trees stood evenly spaced, their trunks whitewashed at the base to protect against sun and pests, branches trained outward for easier harvesting. Depending on the season, fruit hung in different stages of growth: small green spheres, ripening color, or branches stripped clean after picking. Irrigation pipes ran discreetly between rows, their black lengths tracing lines across the soil like quiet infrastructure holding everything together. Water was the orchard's constant concern. Rainfall here arrived unpredictably, sometimes generous, sometimes absent for weeks. To compensate, the landowner relied on a gravity-fed tap system connected to a storage tank positioned uphill. When opened, the tap released a controlled stream into barrels placed throughout the grove, providing manageable distribution without wasting pressure. At dawn, the orchard was usually still. Light crept between branches, turning dew into brief glints along leaves. Insects stirred. Wind carried faint dust, and the scent of fruit skins warming in early sun. Human presence came later, workers arriving to check lines, reposition barrels, or inspect tree health. On this particular morning, the first visitor did not arrive on foot. He approached slowly from the direction of scrubland, beyond the orchard's fence, a solitary elephant moving along paths he had learned over months of seasonal travel. His presence was neither chaotic nor unfamiliar to the region. Wildlife corridors crossed agricultural land, often enough that boundaries were understood more as suggestions than absolute barriers. He walked with measured steps, ears shifting, trunk sampling air currents. The orchard carried scents distinct from surrounding vegetation: moisture, fermenting fruit, mineral tang from metal fixtures. Among them, one scent drew stronger attention: water. The elephant moved along the fence line until he located a weakened section where wires sagged slightly between posts. Pressing carefully rather than forcefully, he widened the gap just enough to pass through. The motion was deliberate, minimizing disturbance rather than destroying structure. Inside, the rows presented a landscape unlike wild terrain: straight paths, even spacing, pipes beneath soil. He advanced between trees, trunk brushing leaves occasionally, guided less by sight than by scent and memory. Previous journeys had revealed places where human systems intersected with natural need. He reached the tap station near the orchard's center. Metal fixtures connected pipe to spigot. Beneath it stood a barrel already partially positioned to collect water when opened. The tap had been loosened slightly the evening before by a worker preparing for morning filling. Pressure built overnight within the system. The elephant investigated. His trunk explored the tap head, testing shape and resistance. Contact shifted the valve fractionally. Not an intentional mechanical operation, but enough to release pressure. Water began to flow in a steady stream, striking the inside of the barrel with hollow resonance. The elephant drank first, trunk drawing water upward, releasing it into his mouth in practiced motion. He repeated the process, consuming deeply until immediate thirst eased. The sound of water filling continued, uninterrupted, as he stepped aside. Barrels filled quietly. The orchard absorbed the moment without spectacle. No alarms, no sudden response. Just the consistent pouring of liquid into containers meant for human timing rather than animal discovery. Elsewhere, the landowner began his morning routine. He walked toward the grove with tools in hand, expecting to manage irrigation personally. Approaching the central rows, he heard water running earlier than expected. Quickening pace, he rounded the path and stopped. The elephant stood near the tap. Distance separated them sufficiently for observation rather than confrontation. The landowner remained still, recognizing both the scale of the animal and the impracticality of interference. Encounters like this required patience more than reaction. He watched as the elephant finished drinking and moved onward between trees. The tap remained open. Water continued filling barrels exactly as intended, though ahead of schedule. The elephant exited through the same gap in fencing, disappearing toward scrubland. Only then did the landowner approach. He checked levels, closed the tap once barrels reached capacity, inspected pipe integrity. No damage appeared beyond the widened fence section. He logged the encounter mentally as part of the ongoing negotiation between cultivated land and surrounding wildlife. The orchard returned to quiet. Leaves stirred. Insects resumed movement. Water distribution proceeded as planned. And somewhere beyond the trees, the elephant continued along his route, having found what he needed among human systems, leaving behind barrels filled earlier than anyone expected, and a reminder that boundaries between wild paths and cultivated order remained porous, shaped daily by necessity and adaptation. The sun rose higher, and with it, the orchard's calm morning order began to shift into working-day reality. Light moved down the rows in clean lines, catching on leaf edges and turning the dust in the air into a faint glitter whenever a breeze passed. The barrels near the central tap stood fuller than usual for that hour. Their surfaces trembled slightly each time a drop fell from the spout after the valve had been closed, as if the system itself needed a moment to accept that the flow had stopped. The landowner stayed near the tap longer than he normally would. He did not panic. He did not run back to the house to tell someone a story immediately. He did what he always did first: assessed what mattered. How much water had been released, whether the barrels overflowed, whether the pipe connection had been strained, whether the surrounding soil showed signs of washout that could later undermine the fixture. He crouched beside the base of the tap and ran a hand along the fitting. The metal was damp but steady. The connection hadn't been twisted hard enough to crack. The valve itself had turned smoothly back to closed. That meant the elephant's contact had been controlled. Accidental or careful, it hardly mattered. What mattered was that the system still worked. Then he walked the nearest rows. Footprints were obvious. Elephants did not pass through a place without leaving a record. Each step impressed the soil with a round, heavy mark, flattening loose earth and crushing small weeds that grew between irrigated trees. Some prints crossed the open path between rows, others angled closer to trunks where the animal's body had brushed by. Here and there, a low branch had been pushed aside, leaves bent and still slowly springing back. The landowner's first instinct, built from years of managing land, was to measure damage in practical terms. Broken branches meant reduced fruit later. A snapped young tree meant years lost. A crushed irrigation line meant repairs and wasted water. He looked for those outcomes with a trained eye. He found none immediately. A few leaves were torn. Some small fruit lay on the ground where it had been knocked loose. But the main structure of the orchard remained intact. The elephant had moved through it as if aware, whether through learned behavior or luck, of where resistance would cause trouble. Still, the fence had been compromised. He walked out to the boundary where the elephant had entered. The wire sagged more than it had the day before, widened into a gap large enough for repeated crossings if left unaddressed. The posts were still upright, but tension had been lost. If the elephant returned, the gap would widen further. If other animals found it, the orchard might face different pressures: pigs rooting, deer feeding, smaller animals slipping in without notice. He stood there for several minutes, thinking. Not in an abstract way. In the way someone thinks when the answer has to become physical action. The elephant had found the tap because water was scarce elsewhere. That meant returning was likely. Blocking the gap entirely might push the animal to break another section later. Leaving it open would invite repeated access. Somewhere between those options lay the only workable path: control, not conflict. A pickup truck arrived around mid-morning, bringing 2 workers who helped with orchard maintenance. They got out, greeted the landowner, and followed him toward the fence. He didn't need to dramatize what had happened. The prints and the sagging wire told the story on their own. One worker whistled softly when he saw the size of the tracks, then crouched to examine them with a kind of respect that mixed curiosity and caution. They began repairs. Not a full rebuild, but reinforcement. They tightened the wire, replaced a staple, drove a short support post into the ground near the weakest point. They didn't have the equipment to make the fence elephant-proof, and they all understood that was not realistic. The goal was simply to restore tension and reduce easy access. While they worked, the landowner's mind stayed on the tap. The elephant's discovery had shown a vulnerability. The valve had been loosened the previous night. Any animal with strength and curiosity could potentially turn it again. Even if the elephant did not intend to open anything, simple investigation could cause water to run unattended, wasting supply that the orchard relied on. He returned to the tap station and made small changes. He repositioned barrels so they would not collect water automatically if flow began unexpectedly. He tightened the valve head more firmly, then added a simple deterrent. Nothing harmful, nothing that would injure an animal, but enough to make the turning less effortless. A thick strap was wrapped around the handle, secured in a way that required more deliberate manipulation to move. He knew it might not stop a determined elephant, but it might slow the moment enough that he could notice, or that the animal would give up and seek easier water elsewhere. By noon, the orchard returned to its normal schedule. Workers moved along rows, checking leaves for pests, clearing fallen fruit, shifting equipment. Water barrels were distributed as planned. The only difference lay in the quiet tension beneath routine. The knowledge that something large, intelligent, and thirsty had walked through these same rows hours earlier. And beyond the fence, the elephant did not vanish from the orchard's story. He traveled through scrubland, where trees stood wilder and paths were less predictable. He visited a shallow natural waterhole that had nearly dried, leaving only a muddy pool. He drank what remained, then stood still for a long time, ears moving slowly. Hunger and thirst shaped his decisions more strongly than comfort. The orchard's water had been clean, consistent, and easy. The memory would hold. Late afternoon brought wind. It carried the orchard's scent outward. Fruit, damp earth, human presence, and the elephant's scent back inward. A heavier animal odor on the breeze, faint but present. One worker paused near the boundary and looked toward the trees beyond the fence, without knowing why, feeling only the subtle sense that the landscape was not empty. Nothing appeared. Yet. The landowner finished his day with another walk along the fence. He checked the repaired section again. It held, but he knew that holding was temporary when tested by tons of weight. He looked at the orchard rows, the tap, the barrels. He listened to the quiet creaks of branches in the evening breeze. He understood the reality without naming it dramatically. The elephant had found the orchard tap, and once an animal learns a reliable resource, it rarely forgets. As dusk approached, the landowner locked the storage shed, checked the tap again, and stood for a moment at the center of the orchard. The barrels were full. The system was stable. The day's work had been done. But the night ahead carried a different kind of possibility. Not fantasy, just the ongoing practical tension between cultivated land and the needs of wild animals moving through a landscape where water dictated everything. Night settled across the orchard with a calm that differed from daytime stillness. It was not silence so much as redistribution of sound. Insects replacing machinery. Distant animal calls replacing human voices. Wind threading through leaves in soft patterns that shifted with the temperature drop. Moonlight cast pale geometry across the rows, turning irrigation lines and tree shadows into parallel bands stretching toward the hillside. The landowner had already gone indoors. Lights glowed faintly from the farmhouse windows before one by one they darkened. Tools rested where they had been set down. The reinforced fence stood quiet along the boundary. The tap station, secured and checked, waited unused until morning. But the orchard was not empty. Hours after midnight, movement returned beyond the repaired section of wire. Branches shifted. Soil compressed under slow, deliberate weight. The elephant approached again, guided less by sight than by memory, and scent carried through cooling air. He paused at the fence. The tension had been restored. The gap was narrower now. He examined it with trunk and tusk, testing without immediate force. Wire resisted more firmly than before. He did not charge or snap it outright. Instead, he walked along the boundary for several meters, seeking another weakness, evaluating structure through touch and pressure. Eventually, he returned to the repaired point. With careful persistence, he leaned into the wire just enough to widen space between strands. The reinforcement slowed him, but not indefinitely. After several measured pushes, he passed through again, leaving the fence stretched but not broken. Inside, the orchard carried familiar scent, fruit skins, damp soil, and beneath all of it, the clean mineral trace of stored water. He moved along the same central route he had used before, navigating rows without haste. His path pressed grass flat again, deepening earlier footprints. The tap station stood ahead, its silhouette recognizable even in low light. He reached it. His trunk explored the barrel edges first, confirming contents through sound and moisture. Empty, redistributed earlier by workers. He turned attention to the valve assembly. The strap now wrapped around the handle altered the experience. He nudged it, finding resistance where none had existed before. He tried again, applying different angle and pressure. The mechanism shifted slightly, but did not release water immediately. He paused, reconsidering through instinctive trial rather than conscious reasoning. Patience followed. Another attempt, trunk curling tighter, twisted the handle just enough to overcome restraint. The strap slipped. The valve turned. Water began to run. The sound was softer than during daylight, carrying through still air in a steady stream. It struck the empty barrel with hollow resonance before pooling and rising gradually. The elephant drank again, repeating the slow, practiced motion of drawing water upward. Nearby trees rustled faintly as wind shifted. Inside the farmhouse, the landowner stirred. The sound alone did not wake him immediately, but over time, repetition broke through sleep. An unfamiliar continuation of water flow outside expected hours. He rose, stepped onto the porch, and listened. The running tap was unmistakable. He did not rush blindly into darkness. Instead, he switched on a handheld light and approached with careful distance, stopping well short of the central rows. The beam revealed shape and movement. The elephant stood by the tap, drinking calmly. The landowner remained still, assessing rather than reacting. Intervention would serve neither safety nor outcome. He allowed the moment to unfold. Human presence acknowledged, but not asserted. After drinking, the elephant stepped away. Water continued filling the barrel quietly, exactly as before. He turned toward the fence and retraced his path, exiting with the same deliberate control he had shown entering. Within minutes, only footprints and the sound of flowing water remained. The landowner approached. He shut the tap, checked the strap, and reset the barrels. His actions were measured, guided by acceptance rather than surprise. This was not sabotage or intrusion in a human sense, simply the natural result of accessible resources intersecting with intelligent wildlife. Dawn came hours later. Sunlight revealed new tracks, widened wire, and filled containers. Workers arrived to begin their tasks, and the landowner shared observations plainly. Repairs would be made again, adjustments planned, perhaps relocation of water points outside the orchard, perhaps stronger reinforcement, perhaps coordination with regional wildlife authorities. The orchard endured. No trees were lost, no lines destroyed, Only adaptation continued, on both sides of the boundary. Beyond the rows, the elephant resumed his broader route through scrubland, memory enriched with confirmation that the orchard tap remained a reliable source. He carried no notion of ownership or trespass, only awareness of water found when needed, and so the cycle remained open. Barrels filled quietly, fences tightened again, paths remembered. In the shared landscape between cultivation and wilderness, neither side declared victory. Only persistence, adjustment, and the ongoing search for balance beneath sun and night alike.